This is a video on the topic of relevant factor analysis, and this specific video is about how you would structure that analysis. Now this is important because it tells you how to start. So if you have some difficult problem that you need to analyze, this tells you where to begin and how to start doing that. So the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you identify the end goal clearly. So you don't want something vague, you don't want to be wandering around pursuing something that you don't know what it is. You want to have a clear end goal. And then once you have that goal, what you have to do next is you have to try and determine all of the factors that might affect that end goal. And then once you have those factors, you can repeat and try and find all of the sub-factors that affect a certain factor. And you can go on and on with that as far as you can. And as you do this, you'll likely run into some unknowns that you'll want to investigate. Now, to talk about how you would actually identify a relevant factor, what you would have to do is you have to find situations where the outcome changes and then try and guess why does it change. So if you're trying to investigate something meaningful, it's going to not always be the same. So you'll have some examples of where it's not the same, and then you want to try and explain, okay, why didn't I get the same thing here? What caused the change? And then if you think you've found a factor, the way to test if it is actually relevant, or the easiest way to test at least, is to test the extremes. So in the extreme cases, that's when you're going to see the difference the most clearly. So when you're at this stage and all you need to do is identify if something is relevant or not, then you want to test the extremes so it's easier to see if it actually matters. Now for an example, imagine if the thing you were investigating was how people behave in a certain stressful situation. So you might not know what the factors are that influence their behavior, but you might come up with an idea and say, I think one of the factors might be that it might be how much experience different people have in the situation. So you might think that might be a relevant factor. And then again, if you want to test it and make sure, you need to consider the extremes, or it's easiest if you do, because then the difference will be the most obvious. So in this case, the extreme situations would be someone with absolutely no experience with that situation. They're seeing it for the first time. And then the other extreme would be someone who is very familiar with the situation. Maybe they deal with it all the time. Maybe it's a big part of their life or something like that. And then you would compare the two different people like that and then see if you think they would have a different outcome, a different behavior in the stressful situation. And if they would, then you can say that that is a relevant factor. And then later on, you might dial it back to try and see exactly how much does it matter, how does it affect the end result. But at this stage, you're just trying to identify what the factors are. Now, that all is a bit intuitive, but something that's a bit harder to see, but is also really important, is how you would identify if there's unknown or hidden factors. How would you know if something's missing? So once you think you've got everything, once you think you know all of the relevant factors, how would you figure out if you're missing something? Well, there's a big thing that you have to look for. So what you need to notice is if there are any situations where all of the factors that you've identified are the same, but you can end up in different outcomes anyway, that's the situation that you need to highlight, and then that will make you realize that you're missing a relevant factor, one or more, because even though everything you know of is the same, you ended up with a different result, so that means there's some other factor out there that's controlling the outcome in this situation. So this is a really important situation to look for and to be on the lookout for and to notice if it comes up. Because again, it signifies that something's missing. And not only does it tell you that something's missing, it also gives you an example to investigate to help find what it is that you're missing. Because you can try and figure out, okay, in this specific situation, what is it that's causing the change? What's causing the difference? So you have something to study, something to investigate that will help you figure it out. Now I'm going to go through a fun example about a game called Hamster Scramble. And I didn't choose this game for any real specific reason. It's just a game that I've played kind of recently and I've tried to come up with my own ideas about. So I'm going to use it as an example here. Now to describe how the game works, it's in the versus mode. There's 2 players, 1 on each side, and you're trying to clear your board. And as you do that, it will send lines to the opponent and push their field down. And whoever's field hits the bottom first loses. So you win by making the opponent fill up first. And then you run around on the bottom part of the screen, and then you grab the hamsters and throw them, and you're trying to match the colors. And then something special about this game is that you can swap to the other person's side of the field and then throw things on their side of the field. So if you wanted to analyze this game, well, you would have to start out by coming up with a clear goal, and there's one very obvious goal here of winning the game. So we have our goal that we want to analyze. How would you win the game? Well, you have to think about all of the factors that affect whether or not you win the game. And here it's very obvious because it's part of the definition, or it's part of the rules of the game. How you win is you make the opponent fill up first. But what's a little bit less obvious is that there's actually 2 components to that. So you can either make yourself fill up slower, or you can make the opponent fill up faster. So these are both their own individual factors that can help you to win the game. And then these factors have their own sub-factors. So to go deeper, you might think of things like, in order to make yourself fill up slower, you have to clear matches on your side of the field to get rid of things so your field doesn't hit the bottom. Or you could also defend against swaps, so if the opponent swaps to your side of the field, you have to stop them from throwing things on your side that's going to make you fill up. And if you wanted to make the opponent fill up faster, you can also clear matches to send lines to their side of the field and push them down, or you can swap to their side of the field and throw things and try to get them to fill up. And at this point, if you try to figure out more factors, you might run into things that you're not entirely sure of yet, or that aren't as obvious as some of these. So if I tried to go another level deeper, I might think of things like, okay, if I wanted to clear matches to make myself fill up slower, what factors come into play there? What do I need to clear in order to make it so that I fill up slower? And what's the best way to go about doing that? And then you might come up with some questions like, does it matter where I clear things? Is that a relevant factor? Do I need to clear things on the sides more? Do I need to clear things on the middle more? Or does it not matter? Is it not a relevant factor? Or is it like, do I need to clear things in a specific way so that I can drop a bunch of things at once? Or is that not a relevant factor? So you can try and come up with different relevant factors, and then you'll probably run into a point where it becomes tough because there's stuff that you have to analyze deeper, stuff that you have to learn about. And to go to the other side, if I wanted to make the opponent fill up faster, I can do that by clearing matches and sending lines to them. But how does that work? In order to figure that out, one of the important relevant factors is how much damage do you send with each clear that you do. So you have to make sure you know what is that damage formula. And then that's going to help you find the sub-factor of what is it that you need to clear in order to make your opponent fill up faster. So what I want you to recognize is that there's a lot of sub-questions that you're going to find, and there's a lot of areas that you're going to find that you need to investigate when you're doing this relevant factor analysis. So as you go through it, it will highlight those areas and it'll show where that fits into the rest of the problem. So if I'm trying to figure out what do I need to clear to make myself fill up slower, like if it's on the left side, I know I'm searching for something to make myself fill up slower. If it's on the right side, I know I'm searching for something to make my opponent fill up faster. So I can keep track of what it is that I need to figure out and where it fits in with the rest of the problem. Now to go into an example that's a bit different, imagine you're trying to figure out something about being smart. So you interview a bunch of smart people and you identify similarities between them, and then you call those similarities the factors that are important to being smart, and you feel like you found all of them, so you call it complete. So is that good enough? Well, probably not. There's various problems there, but one of the big ones is that you need a clear goal, and as I go through this example more, you'll see why. But you need to start with some kind of clear goal, or you need to have some kind of clear goal there at some point to make sure that what you're analyzing comes together correctly. And then you want to also make sure you're not missing anything. Make sure there's no hidden factors out there. So let's try and do a relevant factor analysis of this and start out with some kind of clear goal. So that clear goal might be, so the goal is figuring out what the factors are in being smart, but you might define smart as being successful in school. So gets good grades and all of that, does well on tests. So that's one way to be smart. So if that's your definition of being smart, now that you have a clear goal, you can now state the relevant factors. So most courses that you take have some kind of grading rubric, and they'll tend to all be dependent on the same factors. It's like your grades on assignments and your grades on tests, and sometimes there's other factors that are in there like participation or attendance or things like that might also be factors, but in general you're going to have like these two factors there, assignments and tests, and it'll be from the grading rubrics so you know what they are. It's not something like it's guaranteed to cover everything. Now to go deeper, in order to do well on assignments, some of the factors that are in play there might be your comprehension of the subject, how well you understand all of it, and like how much does it make sense to you? Do you get it? And then another one is the amount of time you spend doing the assignments. So you might understand everything really well, but you might not do very well if you don't spend a lot of time doing your assignments. Like you might not finish them all, or you might turn them in late or something like that. And then a third potential factor would be resourcefulness. So things like, are you able to find and use help? Like, do you ever go to the teacher and ask for advice or get help from them? Or do you have people in the same class that you can talk to and study with? Or do you know people who have taken the class before who are willing to help you and walk you through things that you might not know? So that might be another factor that affects how well you do on assignments. And then for tests, the big factor there might be how much time you spend studying. So if you spend more time studying, you'll probably do better. Now, something you always want to be asking yourself is, are there any factors that I'm missing? Are there any hidden factors out there that I haven't taken into account yet? So let's look at the tests and the time studying. How would I figure out if there's a hidden factor there? Well, I would need to find two things that are the same but have a different result. And in this specific case, that would be two people who spend a similar amount of time studying, but they get a different score on tests. And if you think about it, you can probably think of a lot of examples of that happening. At least I know I've seen a lot of examples of that where some people can not spend very much time studying and still do really well on tests. Some people can not spend that much time studying and do pretty poorly on tests. Some people can spend a lot of time studying and still not do that well. Some people can spend a lot of time studying and do really well. So, because you can find people who spend the same amount of time studying but get a different result, that means you know there's a hidden factor there. So then I can try and explain what it is that causes the difference, and I might think of something like test taking ability. So then that might be enough to explain why like people can spend a different amount of time studying or the same amount of time studying but get a different score on a test, because maybe one person is a lot better at taking tests. So that could be another factor. And again, if I want to figure out if I think I found all of them, I would have to try and see if there's any situations where a hidden factor is influencing the outcome. So that's more difficult now because it's hard to accurately quantify what someone's test taking ability is. But if I could find two people who spend a similar amount of time studying and who I believe have a similar test taking ability, and they still get a different result, that means there's still another factor that I'm missing. But as a first pass through it, you might start out with something like this. But this was only for one definition of how you might be smart. So another way that you could be smart is that you could be knowledgeable. So you could be someone who just always seems to know a lot of things, always seems to have the answer when someone asks a question. You would probably be good at trivia shows or something like that. So that's one way to be smart. And the factors that go into that might be quite different than the factors that go into being smart in terms of being good in school. So if you're just talking about being knowledgeable, well, the two factors that you might come up with that go into that are how much information do you obtain about different subjects and how well do you retain that information. And then for obtaining information, that might be like how much access do you have to information? Like, do you have books that you can read about the subject? Can you take classes about the subject? And now with the internet, can you find the information online? Is it in a language that you can read? And then how much effort do you put in to access information? Like, do you actually take classes? Do you actually read books? Do you actually look stuff up online about it? And then retaining information would also have its own sub-factors too. But you can even argue that there's other ways to be smart, like you might say high reasoning ability. Like, are you good at logic puzzles? Are you good at critical thinking? Are you good at coming up with theories and recognizing patterns, developing your own ideas? That could be another way to be smart. So the things that might go into that, like the relevant factors for that problem might be things like critical thinking ability, pattern recognition, and logical reasoning. So here's three different types of like first pass relevant factor analysis on the topic of being smart, but what you should notice is that they all come up with quite a lot of different factors that aren't necessarily related to each other because they have a different end goal. So this is why you really have to define that end goal clearly to start with, because if you don't define it, you might be finding factors that are like all over the place. You might be finding some factors that affect your ability to be successful in school, but other factors might affect your knowledgeability. It might affect how much you know, and other factors might be going towards how well you're able to reason through things. So you're not really painting a clear picture if you don't have a clear goal, because the factors might be all over the place. So that's all for the examples in this video. And to summarize everything, this is all important because it tells you where to start out. It tells you how to begin doing a relevant factor analysis. And what you have to do, and I hope that I've made it clear enough why, is that you have to start with a clear goal. So well-defined goal, you have to know what it is that you're looking for in order to not paint a mixed up picture. Then you have to try and find all of the factors that you believe are relevant to the goal and note down what those are, and then look for the sub-factors that affect each factor and go as far as you can. And then as you do this, you should run into points that you need to investigate deeper, so it can show you, okay, I need to investigate this and this and this, and I need to learn this information. Then you also have to be on the lookout for missing and hidden factors. So again, this one's important because it's not as obvious, but it's very useful. So if you want to identify that a hidden factor is there, you need to find situations where all of the factors that you know about are the same, but you end up with a different result. So if you ever see that situation come up, that's something that you need to highlight and make a mental note of, and make sure that you're aware that it exists and that it means that there's a hidden factor there that needs to be taken into account. Then finally, your goal would be to go as deep as possible to try and understand as much as you possibly can about the subject you're investigating, and try and make sure that you've captured everything that you can, so that there's no missing or hidden factors out there that are having a secret influence on the result. So you want to find as many of the factors as you can. Now that's all for this video, but in some other videos I'll be talking more about other parts of relevant factor analysis.